Thank you, everyone. So I can see that Andressa, Raj, and myself representing the bank, and then we have, tech companies, Microsoft and TigerGraph joining us. And I'm kind of the hybrid. I came from tech, so this is a very exciting panel. So we'll kick off our discussion. First one, right? So, first question is, people in finance are certainly talking about AI a lot, and this is evident in all the discussion we have today, right, and some in tomorrow. Yet the true number of models in production across the banks and financial service institutes can vary quite widely. So I would like to kind of get everybody's kind of take on this. And Andressa, we want to kick this off?
Yeah, just a quick disclaimer. The opinions presented here are myself and not that of Goldman Sachs. So, yes, I just wanted to highlight that banks have already developed a significant tech stack, right? We have legacy models that we've been working on for a very long time. So yes, if you think about the whole inventory of models used within banks, definitely AI, machine learning is kind of like a growing area. It's still not comparable to the size of the rest of the inventory. Having said that, I don't think that we should judge that based on the current inventory, but in the growth and the potential growth and the investments that are being made in this area. So in terms of growth, we have observed a significant growth in the number of models, AI, ML, and in very different areas. So we go from credit decisions, underwriting, into trading, in efficiencies in the operational side, and a number of other different areas, marketing, so we've seen growth in many different divisions within the firm.
Thank you, Andressa. And I'm going to direct this to Michael, because you also definitely has a lot of perspective collaborating with various companies and also companies outside of the financial industry. So what's your take on this?
Sure. Thank you, Daniel. So I know that speaking for TigerGraph's particular platform, we found quite a bit of traction working with Tier 1 financial institutions. I think we're currently in production instances with 6 of the top 10 global banks. And a lot of the areas that we've seen a lot of uptake in so far center around real-time transactional fraud detection, anti-money laundering, to a lesser extent, but a growing extent, know your customer, and also a number of other kind of regulatory compliance areas that we're focused on, alluding to the point made earlier about the fact that these banks have obviously had fraud models in place for a very long time. There is a significant technology stack that underpins that, and with that stack obviously comes some inertial characteristics that have to be overcome. And what we've been able to do is integrate our platform within an existing tech stack by using graph or network data representations, which are basically just a collection of entities or nodes. This can be people, places, things, effectively, and relationships that exist between those things, those nouns. And by representing your data in that way, rather than kind of a more traditional relational database tabular structure, you're able to capture a really complex set of relationships that exist. And we're able to use our platform to actually derive embeddings from those network graphs that are then used as additional feature vectors inside of a pre-existing ML model pipeline that these banks have. So they're actually able to leverage and augment their existing tech stack rather than have to kind of rip out and replace it.
Very interesting. Thank you, Michael. And similarly, Kent, you must know that I'm coming after to you with this question, right? So, from your perspective, especially Microsoft, right, working with so many different companies, what do you see, in terms of model development and the deployment, even from like, I know you're kind of specialized in HPC, right, area.
Yeah, so we'll see, customers across the spectrum. We'll see customers who still treat AI products or SVA, let's use for instance, utilizing traditional sort of risk analysis simulation, throw it against a Monte Carlo simulation 100,000 times and come out with a result. There are times, however, in which that simply becomes impossible to continue with that throwing more and more compute at the problem. We've seen with customers like Scotiabank or RiskFuel in Canada, in which it was taking them weeks to solve a particular problem that they were having. And they decided, hey, we can't keep doing this. So what they ended up doing was modeling their solution into an AI. They took all their inputs and outputs that had been doing over years, and finally they applied AI against it. The results came back to them in less than an hour. They saw a million-fold increase in how fast they could process the model. So there is a time in which keep doing things the same way as we've always done them cannot continue to do as market volatility continues to increase as it is. So,
yeah, thank you for that perspective. Raj, you want to add something?
Yeah, I think we are seeing a rapid acceleration of adoption of AI across the board. The primary key areas where we see big growth is customer experience, because customers are expecting hyper-personalized attention. So conversational AI is gaining a lot of prominence, particularly during the pandemic. The call center staff suddenly become, half of them get sick. So that's where, AI models are picking up the call volumes, providing more personalized service, contextual insights, predicting what is the next question, so on and so forth. Second area is fraud area, because fraudsters always, it's like a catch-22. They are always ahead of the game. So traditional statistical rule-based models create too many false positives, not able to catch the latest sophisticated schemes from fraudsters. That's where AI is extremely effective, particularly random forest and XGBoost is more powerful in the fraud space. Credit underwriting side, obviously we are leveraging a lot of data points to improve the approval rates, at the same time keeping the loss rate lowest level. Yeah, these are the three broader areas where, and in recent times we see surprisingly AI is gaining a lot of importance in the liquidity risk, because if you look at past 3 or 4 months, Fed has been raising interest rates too quick, too fast, which never been in the past 5 decades, because inflation is 40-year high. They don't know how to deal with it. The only lever they have is raising interest rates too quick. Nobody thought about 75 basis points raise every month. Okay, so it's creating a lot of shocks. So traditional statistical models are not able to capture the deposit decay, how quickly deposits will attrite. So AI ML models are extremely effective, and we see like a 10x lift in the model performance compared to the traditional statistical models in terms of determining the liquidity planning as well as deposit decay, how the deposits will run off, how a given funding source will dry out. Those kind of areas we see phenomenal improvement, big lift, using machine learning in recent times. So I think banks realized that AI is a significant competitive advantage. If they are not using AI, they'll get disrupted. On an annual basis, fintechs are eating anywhere in the range of 15 to 20% of traditional banks' revenue by effectively using AI. So banks realized and embracing these AI deep learning algorithms in a very big scale. So those who are not using AI, they will become dinosaurs quite soon.
Yeah. Excellent. So it's hard to follow that. I think everybody realized the reason we're here is because we all realize that AI is important for finance. And at JP, we also cross all the functions, looking at not just the traditional fraud space, but also the customer success space, like Raj mentioned. We also look at business operation, any type of optimization we could do leveraging AI, we're looking into. So I think no doubt that this is a very important area. So with that, I want to kind of jump into the next topic, right? So, we all have different experience since we come from we have different journey into different organization. But it will be interesting to see like what everybody experienced with in terms of AI in finance, like what surprised you the most. And I'll probably kick this off since I already confessed that I have a journey coming from tech companies into finance. And so my own journey is, I did expect, given that I've been with tech companies in Silicon Valley for over 20 years before I decided to take on the role of building this new AI team for JP Morgan, I did expect some level of compliance and complexity, but I've learned that there's the order of magnitude of the challenge is beyond kind of my expectation. And so that surprised me quite a bit. I do think some of that, can be improved. But a lot of that also it comes with, this is a very highly regulated industry and it is what it is, but that's kind of something that surprised me the most. And I'd like to hear if anyone want to kind of contribute to their own, their perspectives.
Yeah, on my side, I wasn't surprised because that's my job. So I was actually when we started to look, a few years ago, when we started to look more specifically at a set of AI machine learning, we reassessed our control framework to see if it was appropriate to deal with these new models. There were areas where definitely we need to kind of rethink our documentation templates, our assessment, for example, for recalibrations, because the model recalibrates itself, so how are we going to do that? So there were areas where but those were very specific areas, and the framework actually kind of sit very well. And I think the regulatory constraint, to be very honest, we have some best practice guidances coming from different government agencies, but I'm not sure that it will not even increase in the future. So the expectation is really that these controls are necessary. We're dealing with people's monies, with their livelihood, so we have to use AI machine learning in a very responsible way. And I think the challenge for us is how are we going to implement this framework in a way that really is still incentivize the development, still keeps us in the frontier of creating and using new models. The other aspect which I think kind of surprised me in this area is actually the power of these models, as it was mentioned. I mean, it's very nice to see some of the results that we see on using these models. The power of using open source code, sharing information, and we see so many young talent, engineers that are well versed in machine learning, and it's much easier to code these days rather than to kind of like code the C++ that we used to have. So for me, the surprise is really kind of like the opportunities and the power of these technologies. But I do think that we need to implement them in a very kind of responsible and controlled way.
Yeah, I 100% agree with Andrea. I think AI is a weapon. There has to be some responsible, guardrails or appropriate frameworks is absolutely inevitable. More and more regulations are going to come. Banks traditionally have been having SR 11.7. Now the Congress is currently draft state Algorithmic Accountability Act is under review, notice of proposed rulemaking. That means that each and every industry, each and every company that uses AI will be falling under the supervision of FTC. FTC will govern, if this is passed, the bill is passed, the Algorithmic Accountability Act. I think more and more regulations is going to come. Banks may not be surprised too much because they have already some, model risk management policies, model risk management standards are in place. I think, these control standards will bring some level of standardization. some kind of guardrails that will help to use in AI in a more responsible manner, without which, it will be a huge risk down the line. In last financial crisis, for example, irresponsible usage of the model, without any kind of policies and standards, banks lost billions of dollars of taxpayers' money. Under TARP program, government have rescued most of the banks. So we want to avoid similar kind of situation. I think regulations are required, but over-regulations also can cripple the innovation. There has to be a trade-off. There has to be a balance between regulation and innovation in order to foster the healthy growth of AI economy.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I think with that, I would like to kind of lead into our conversation into what are some of the key challenges of, kind of deploying and applying AI for finance. And perhaps, Michael, you would like to kick this off for us?
Sure, thank you. So, a number of people here have already touched on the issues surrounding transparency or explainability in terms of AI models and issues surrounding disparate impact. One of the, biggest tactical issues that we see is simply the sheer availability of data and the fact that these data are stored across hundreds, in some cases thousands, of different systems, different silos, and they're often, these systems were put together over a period of many years, and it is, I don't believe I've ever seen a client where we've gone in at an enterprise level and they have a well-defined kind of universal ontology or taxonomy for describing the way that they store data and the way that, that different fields and attributes are structured. And so you have all of these varying kind of ontologies and hierarchies that are built, that were purpose-driven for one particular application, but now the bank is looking at leveraging data from many or all of these sources to make decisions, and simply connecting that data and providing a unified framework for it to be ingested in and for you to be able to track and monitor the lineage of that data is a big challenge. Most of the time, probably everyone here knows that most of the time and most of the budget that are associated with AI use cases inside of financial institutions, more than half of that money is spent really on data preparation, data sourcing, and data cleansing. And those processes are not well automated right now. They require a lot of manual work from people who have expertise in those areas, and so it's a very difficult process to integrate all of those different data sources into a framework that can ultimately produce some type of result.
Thank you, Michael. And so along that line, I kind of want to turn to Kent here. So what do you see in terms of the compute and the infrastructure side? Is there a particular unique challenges that's very specific to applying AI in finance?
Certainly in the last year or so, we've certainly seen supply side challenges and be able to deliver the resource of the GPUs or the CPU models that the customer wants. If customer needs to have 100,000 cores to run this capacity, not forcing them to go through hoops to achieve it. We've seen customers that have being unable to, in our competitors' clouds, potentially not being able to shut down their resources because they were afraid that they wouldn't get it back. Trying to prevent bad days, or when market volatility drives tremendous growth that everyone wants to run at quarters end their entire resource approach. So again, capacity challenges as one evaluates one's cloud vendor is extremely important. Being able to ensure that you can have the resources when you need them, why you need, without having to potentially go to different regions, et cetera. In other cases, I've seen challenges on the ops side, whether or not making sure the right models get run, and making sure that who can run those models and what models get run is also the challenge. we would call that ML ops within Azure, but of course other products have similar sort of machine learning pipelines that allow who can deploy and what models can be run at any one point in time. So making sure that the models that are run in a cost efficient and also a transparent manner. So.
Oh, thank you, Ken. So add on top of that, right? So we talk about the data challenges, and even this many years, data still remain the sort of sole biggest challenge for most organizations, and that's even beyond finance. And I remember last year I gave a talk at a conference, and there's this statistics that was done by Kaggle a couple of years back. They surveyed data scientists and said, what's the single most challenge for your work? And over half of the respondents say dirty data or data unavailability is the most bigged challenge for them. So I think having a good data strategy, making sure that we kind of power our teams to be able to develop solutions based on good quality data is definitely very important. Now, I want to kind of add on top of beyond the compute and also the data is sort of talent. I think talent to me has been a very big challenge, especially building this team based in Palo Alto, which is the heart of Silicon Valley, competing with these big tech companies, literally our neighbors, is very, very challenging. Being able to recruit the right talents and retain them and make sure that they have a clear career path within the organization, I see as a very, very challenging task especially for finance. And so most folks will say, like even myself, right? When I decided to join JP, my tech friends said, why do you go to a bank? You didn't study finance or MBA. You're a techie, why do you go to a bank? So there's still that stereotype, like, banks just do finance. They're not a tech organization, but that absolutely is not true. Given the type of innovation that I've seen at JP, I'm blown away. A lot of work is like these very advanced research, even like in the quantum space and all that. I think later we're going to talk about some of the trend. So that's kind of my own take on this. So with that, I want to pivot to our next question, right? So now we understand, adoption, like people want to use it, right? But what's the challenge of scaling up so that across the organization we can become an AI-driven organization, even though at the heart we're a financial service provider. So I would like to kind of guide this discussion, sort of with the framework that I proposed last year. We already talked about, literally in my mind, there are 5 pillars that every leaders need to think about. And this is not limited to just banks or finance institute. This is like broadly for all the organization, right? So 5 pillars that I propose. One is data, and we will talk about that, like the data strategy. What's your organization's data strategy? We're dealing with legacy data. Some were there for decades. We're dealing with duplicate data, multiple data sources. How do you know what's the single source of truth, right? And a lot of data silos, data governance. There was a good discussion this morning about data governance. So that's already a very big area. And the second area, obviously, is compute. Today, machine learning and AI development is compute hungry. So you definitely need to make sure you have sustainable and reliable infrastructure to be able to do that development. And the third area I just mentioned is about talent. Talent is, without people, knowledgeable workforce, you'll not be able to build a strong AI capability within the organization. Now, the fourth and fifth, in my mind, often overlooked. One, I think operation, like recent years, people realizing, right, because we're focusing so much on, hey, building better model, bigger model, GPT-3, Google's Palm, and we'll just get bigger and better and more accurate, but we're really not thinking about, well, how do you make that deployment in production environment? How does that integrate with the rest of the business, right? So that operation is super important. And a lot of people don't get to that, or organization kind of in their infancy in the AI journey, they don't think about that. They think about the first three pillars. Those are obvious ones. I need data, I need compute, I need people. Those are obvious. But usually operation comes when they have some model and they're kind of scratching their head, what do we do next? But operations should be part of the planning from the get-go. And finally, we've spent some time talking about, and today I'm so happy to know that a lot of folks talk about governance and compliance, because this is even more as an afterthought outside of the highly regulated industry. You know, tech companies and other companies, they rarely think about governance and compliance until it's too late, until there's some mistake happen and cause the company huge damage to their reputation and even some really financial impact to them. So I would like to turn to our panel to think about, these specific areas, if everybody wants to jump in.
Yeah, sure. I think definitely data is a key challenge. Not only data quality, but data is often spreaded across multiple data stores, right? So the metadata is inconsistency. Oftentimes, model development time, majority portion is figuring out the data, scrubbing the data, normalizing the data, feature engineering. This will take nearly 80% of the time, right? So how do we bring efficiency scale in that area is critical thing. How do we reuse the features across the models? So how do you create a catalog of the features so that reusability of it is critical? And then MLOps, everyone will go in a very siloed deployment. Somebody will deploy on Kubernetes, someone will deploy on OpenShift, so on and so forth. Dockerization, how do you containerization? Some level of standardization, consistency across ML lifecycle can bring efficiency scale. Like, how do you create a factory floor of ML models, AI models? That is the winning strategy, right? So standardization of the framework across the board, reusable data pipelines is critical. In the same way, all models are wrong in the long run. So how do we proactively identify the drift, either data drift, concept drift, model drift, so that you can avoid losses? So you have to automate model monitoring framework in such a way based on the criticality of the model. Sooner, the moment ground truth is available, you should be able to monitor the performance. And also, how do you dynamically route the traffic? So we build champion challenger models, continuously track which model is performing. Depends on the performance of the model, we route the traffic. Just like how interstate has a traffic, you take an exit route and bypass it, same way, we continuously track the model performance on a real-time basis that will avoid the opportunity miss and serve the models whichever is working better manner. So these are some of the critical aspects to get the maximum ROI out of the ML efforts, I would think.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to direct this to Andres again. And so we already talked a lot about governance and compliance. So how do you think the organization, especially for financial companies, to think about in this space so that they're not simply putting red tapes around our technologists, right? They're guiding them and helping them and to help them meet the requirements in this space.
Yes, at Goldman Sachs, the model control policy, the model risk management framework is very important in the development, implementation, and usage of these models, AI, ML. And it works in some areas in providing this efficiency, because we give developers the guidance up front. We tell them, you can work on research, you can try different solutions, but if you're going to use this model, you will need to first, it needs to be registered in some SDLC environment. It needs to have change controls. It needs to have a documentation that is exactly following this template. So we give them all of the guidance to say, and that kind of facilitates, because there's no discussion or anything. They can focus on, building the technology, building the solution. And we also, one of our very important points as well as a regulated firm is that if there is any solution simpler than a more complex solution, this is the preferred methodology, because there are maintenance costs, There are requirements around transparency. So for us, one of the things that are very, very critical are the explainability, interpretability, and the tools that are built on top of the model to really understand what are the boundaries, where it works well and where it might break, because that's the critical point. But yes, of course, and then it's a cost-benefit analysis. So of course there will be, it's not like you have a startup where you can do any kind of model and put it in production, right? There are very specific and commensurate controls. So for the models that are more impactful to the firm, those have more stringent controls. And then for other models, then you might have more lenient ones.
I would like to give one small example. Recently, one of the top 5 investment management firm have used incorrect version of the model in the production. The outcome of the model results have been communicated to the millions of their customers. So as Andrea mentioned, I think governance and controls are extremely important, right, to avoid incorrect usage of the model, wrong version of the model, appropriate change controls. Those are all extremely critical. More than loss, a lot of reputation also is associated here.
Yeah, all very good points. So I think our audience is probably very eager to hear about what comes next, right, the future. So let's spend like 3 minutes to cover this. Maybe I'll start with Kent. From Microsoft's perspective, what do you see as the up and coming cutting edge technologies that's happening?
So just this past week, we had a press release of quantum AI being utilized within FSI customer. It's an insurance company looking to get into new markets and utilizing quantum to figure out if they should or not. Sometimes getting the answer is not matter if you get the right answer, but getting the rightest answer more quickly and progressing down that path to get to utilizing quantum to figure out appropriate methods of integration. So some people utilize quantum and say, how many qubits can I do and will I break cryptography or not? Microsoft takes a slightly different look and say, how can we make quantum more useful to you? And that may be, breaking having 100 qubits, or it could be just making sure that you go into the right business in the future. So that would be the difference, I would say, on cutting edge, on where we're heading with AI.
Thank you, Kent. Michael, do you have some perspective on that?
Sure. So, and this is being driven largely by regulatory pressures, but ever since the financial crisis of 2008 and 9, the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision.
Okay, you guys, I'm super immature, but look at the shower. What do you think we're gonna do here? Take a shower and look out?
Data lineage from the point of ingestion to whatever your authoritative pricing source is, all the way through to any type of model outputs, and you have to be able to track and trace every transformation, every touch point that occurs to that particular datum along that journey. That's a very, very difficult process. It's a process that I don't think any bank has completely solved yet. But that ability and the ability to aggregate risk and to view that risk across any number of dimensions in any degree of granularity in near real time. These are some of the things that we're working on. Some of the biggest challenges from a regulatory perspective, at least, that our large financial institutional clients are dealing with.
Thank you, Michael. And I'll just add the last point and before we conclude. So I think in my mind, from technology point of view, there's a strong interest and development in data-centric AI. I think seeing that data as the core of everything that data scientists and machine learning engineers work with, having that rethinking about how you do development, deployment, operation, and even support from business functions around data, treating data as first-class citizen in your organization rather than an afterthought. Oh, we just store this in a database without really carefully thinking about what this data asset could bring the value to your organization. So I think more and more people will be focusing and more research will be done on this another trend I see is also some, folks touched on earlier today. Across the board, there's human-centric AI by combining artificial intelligence and human intelligence together, especially in highly regulated industry that we're in. Having that extra layer of safe check, gatekeeper, and really builds confidence and increase the adoption. And also, research has shown that combining these two together actually outperforms anyone alone anyway. So it has a strong technical evidence that this is the right direction to take. So with that, I want to thank my fellow panelists for a very engaging and interesting discussion, and thank you all for your participation today.